Well, good evening. This is what they did to you earlier. Good evening. Okay, we're awake, we're good. The sound of rain is dulcet tones. We're doing all right. If you have your Bibles, you can turn to the book of Romans, chapter 12, verse 1 is we're going to be reading out of today. One of the questions that I got asked a lot, I was in college ministry for 10 years, and the question that they would give to me was, Aaron, what I'm looking for is I want to know what God's will in my life is, right? I want to know why I'm here. I want to know what He's going to do with me. And most of the time, as they were thinking about this, they were sort of looking long-term, further out. What is it that God is going to do? What could this be for me? What is His will for my life? Sometimes they would spiritualize it even and say, I want to know what God is calling me to. And I think a lot of times in churches, if we're not careful, we have reversed the order that God asks for us and wants from us as we start to ask and answer that question. A lot of the times we start with a sense of, well, what are you good at, right? What's your skill set? What are kind of your passions in life? And then you just kind of grab that and hopefully you can find something that you can use that for, that God has called you to. And the problem is, this cares a lot about performance and not very much about proximity. Because when God is calling us, when God is wooing us to Himself and starting to move us in the direction that He calls us to, there's an order that seems to happen that turns a lot of what the world would give us on its head. And I think we find it in Romans. It may be a chapter that you've heard and maybe even heard preached from, but perhaps not heard exegeted quite in this particular way. And this is what he says. He says, "Therefore I urge you, my brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper, sometimes reasonable worship. Do not then be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, His good and pleasing will." So if for a moment you could imagine with me, when I think about the way we think about the future, I want us to think about it as sort of lenses, if you will. That there's certain lenses that we view our lives through, that God has moved, God has called, God is sort of wooing us towards. And He starts out by saying, "My brothers and sisters." It's a familial term. What God is calling us to is closeness to Him. That's His desire for us. That when God is wooing us, that when God is drawing us, when God is moving us into right relationship with Him, He is calling us to a closeness. This is the first lens that we need to start to view the rest of our purpose through, that we start to view the rest of His will through. If we start over here someplace, we start to think about our lives as performance-based. What can I do for God? What can I do to earn maybe the love or the respect of God? And God is calling us to something so much more than that. He's calling us to a closeness. God doesn't pick the way we expect Him to. He certainly does not pick the way the world would view it. That's impressive. I can push through a lot. I did 10 years of college ministry. You'd be surprised what happens out there when you're preaching to college kids. If you're going to be okay, I'm going to be okay. You may want to go roll up your windows in case your car is out there. God doesn't pick the way we think of Him. He's like, oh yes. God does not pick the way we think of Him picking. I don't know if they still do this now. When I was growing up, we would play dodgeball. Do they still play are they allowed to play dodgeball in junior high anymore? Is that Some of you are like, yeah. Are you allowed to pick teams because that's what we had to do. We had to pick teams. Who is it that you're going to pick first? And there would always be this sort of order that always happened every time. The same people would get picked first. The same people would be picked last. And if you were at the end, you were just sort of waiting for God to do something, right? You're just sort of waiting, please just let me get picked before them, right? So finally one year, Coach Schaefer, our high school basketball coach, who was also our gym teacher, says, I'm going to let Brandon and Aaron pick the teams. Now, Brandon and I both played basketball. We were both on the basketball team. I was a dual threat. I played both guard and center. Center of the bench guarded the water bottles. Brandon played along with me, and he said, hey, I'm going to let you two pick. And Brandon got to pick first, and he said, I'm going to pick Lee. Lee, at that point in his life in 8th grade, was already 6'2". When we traveled with Lee on our junior high basketball team, we had to carry his birth certificate so people understood he really was of age. His freshman year, I saw Lee throw a basketball off the backboard, take one step from the foul line, catch it, and dunk it one-handed. And he walks up, not surprised at all that he was picked first. And then I pick Brian. Now, to describe Brian to you, Brian had not yet hit his growth spurts. I'm not actually sure Brian ever hit a growth spurt. He had extremely thick glasses because he couldn't see, but you couldn't wear glasses in gym class. And that's not helpful for dodgeball. Brandon goes again. He says, I pick Eli. Eli was a huge hulk of a man. In high school, he was voted best body in high school, which, by the way, I think is a very weird thing for high schools to vote on. But he couldn't even bend his arms real high. He would just sort of spin and toss the ball through cinder blocks. And it was my turn again. I said, I pick Jason. Now, Jason, right now, is designing apps for Google, which is a great skill in life, not helpful for dodgeball. And we went through the whole way like that. I would love to tell you some cool overcomer story where the underdogs won. Friends, we got slaughtered. Heads were rolling, limbs were falling off. I got downstairs to the locker room, and there was just a circle of nerds that were like, if you ever do that again, we're going to be really mad. It was crazy. But when God shows up and he decides to pick someone, he doesn't do it based on what we can do for him. He doesn't call us to performance. He calls us to proximity. He is calling us to closeness to him. And then it says, not only do I want you to experience this closeness, my brothers and sisters, not only do I want you to experience this proximity to God, not only is he calling us to that, but he's calling us to the ensuing character that comes with that calling. And here's the problem. If we get these lenses out of order, thing gets fuzzy. If we start with the character, we do what Dr. Brown talked about as sin management. We look a certain way, we act a certain way, we talk a certain way. But I'm not convinced we know Jesus. I need 2 more of those in about 5 minutes. He says, I want to bring you into proximity. It's not that he doesn't care about our actions. He cares very much, but he wants our actions to flow out of this closeness that we have to him, to flow out of this proximity that we have to him. When I went to college, and I won't name where because it's Asbury night and I don't want to offend anybody, but it wasn't there. I came to a place in my life that it wasn't a good spot. I was studying to be a minister, but I wasn't convinced that I believed in God anymore. And it wasn't because of my professors, and it wasn't because of my parents. It wasn't some sort of sin in my life that I was chasing after. It was just a point came that these things that I had always proclaimed with glee were too good to be true, just seemed too good to be true. And none of my professors knew. And I would meet with them and I would ask them questions. And I would challenge them and I would push back. And I am at the place that I am today. Not because Dr. Smith and Dr. Bounds were brilliant, although they are. Not because they could answer all my questions, although they did. But because after the questions and their day-to-day lives, I got to see the character that they had. And not only did I see their character, but I started to realize something. I wasn't sure I believed in this Jesus guy, but I was pretty sure they knew him. The character that they had flowed out of the proximity, the closeness that they had to God. It wasn't an act. It wasn't legalism. It wasn't pretend or put on. It was a natural outflowing of the closeness that they had with Jesus Christ that allowed them to be put in a spot that their lives were radically transformed by Jesus. And if we start here, things get fuzzy. And I'm afraid. I'm afraid too often in our tribe, in our movement, holiness has started here instead of here. You had to behave before you could belong or believe. And to Romans, he says, my brothers and my sisters, my family, God is calling you to a proximity, a closeness with him so that you can know him, Galatians says, and be known by him. God is calling us to a closeness and the resulting character that comes with that. And then we start to move on. We got two more lenses. He says, I'm calling you to this closeness. I'm calling you to this character. And then we do what we would traditionally start thinking about when we talk about our calling. This is where God starts to use the character that we have and that has been developed through our proximity and closeness with him, that we move to a mature, developing character that he then says, I want to call you to something. And we haven't gotten to skill set yet. And I, for one, am thankful for that. Because if you would have asked my high school, I would not have been voted most likely to make his living public speaking. Why? Well, for one, I stutter. Most often when I'm tired, so you may not hear it this weekend, but by midweek you're going to hear some shotgun approaches as I talk. I'm not in camp meeting shape like the pros yet. Not only did I stutter, but I had a mush mouth. I actually had to have my tongue clipped as well as both of my lips because I couldn't pronounce words properly. And I have another problem. The colloquial term is spoonerisms. My doctor told me it was a sense of verbal dyslexia. I switch consonant sounds and sometimes vowels for no reason at all. One time at a wedding, I looked out and said, it's customary to cuss the bride. And the groom said, well, okay. And I was like, no, not in church. It's not a good way to start. And if you ever see me preach, you'll notice before I get up, I kneel down and pray. And this is my prayer. Dear God, please don't let me stutter. Dear God, please do not make me screw up my words. And Lord, if I switch consonants or vowels, don't let me curse in front of these people. And I grew up going to camp meeting. I grew up going to camps where being called into ministry was sort of the ultimate, right? They would come down, and I remember kneeling at an altar, and the people would be kneeling beside me. And the guy beside me would just be crying, going, Dear God, call me into ministry. And I'd be beside him going, Dear God, call him into ministry. He's crying. Look at him. Leave me out of this. I wanted to be a surgeon. Surgeons make more money than pastors. Fact. Surgeons don't have to talk to people. They walk in, they say, we're going to cut you up. The nurse will take care of it, and they leave. And when you're asleep, you don't care if your surgeon stutters. You don't care if they mess up words. You don't care if they can talk. You just care if you're going to live. And that sounded really good. And God took a young kid. And he said, I'm not calling you to a skill set. I'm calling you to be close to me. Maybe stop looking out 20 years, Aaron. Maybe stop looking out 20 weeks. And start focusing on how are you drawing close to me today. And my fear is in much of the evangelical movement, we've started so far down here that we don't even worry over here. If you've got a skill set, you're probably called. And if you're called, we'll figure out the character later. If you're a charismatic individual that talks good on stage, you've got a good chance of growing a church and being called to one. And we cannot handle the weight of that if we don't have the closeness to God. And I think what we have seen in the last 20 years in our churches is individuals whose character could not handle the weight of their calling because they didn't have closeness with God. And here's what I can tell you. If the spotlight on you is brighter than God's light within you, you will melt. I guarantee it. And he says, I'm not calling you to a skill set. I'm calling you to know me. I want you to know me. I want you to be known by me. I want you to have a proximity. Here's what I know. When you're close to someone, you start to look like them, right? You can look around the room. You see the older couples here tonight. They look like each other. That's what happens when you get married. If you're dating someone, you should look at them right now. Start making your decision. Do I want to look like that? Why? Well, there's a scientific reason. When we talk with someone, after we've been with them for a while, we actually start to mimic their expressions. It's our way that we communicate with one another. You start to smile like them. You start to kind of grin like them. Your eyes start to move like them. Your wrinkle lines start to look like their wrinkle lines because you're so close to them, you can't help but start to look like them. And what happens, what we call holiness, is this idea that our closeness, our proximity to God is so strong that we have to start acting like Him. He saturates our every being. And we have this closeness, this ensuing character that then informs our calling. College kids would come up to me all the time when I was at school. They say, Aaron, I want to know what God's called me to do. I said, you know what, I can tell you. And they were like, really? Yeah, come in. And so they'd come in and they'd sit down. I said, do you really want to know? And they'd say, yeah. I said, get out your pen. And they would get it out. I'd say, God is calling you to do your homework. Same response. Only then they would look around and say, is there someone else I can talk to? And they say, what do you mean? I said, you're here to prepare for out there. And if you don't prepare here and dig in here and dive deep here, you're never going to get this. Our character is determined by our proximity. Draw me closer, God. Closer to you, so that my life can look different. God is calling us to a closeness that informs our character, that then moves us to a calling. And I'm afraid so often we start over here and we're fuzzy. This is our capacity. This is your skill set. This is how well you can do something, how long you can do something, right? This is what we look for when we call our pastors at our church. You know, what do we desire? We desire someone who works long hours, is open on the weekend, and will abandon his family if we need him to. That's not on the search list, but that's our unspoken rule. I want a big capacity. I want someone who can do everything they can from the pulpit. I want them to be new and young and fresh and experienced for 40 years. Right? We start over here, and then we just cannot comprehend what has happened when we're not sure they're called because their character isn't strong enough, because we didn't give them the time to get close to God. And our proximity drives our character. I grew up going to camp meetings. I told you guys, I'm a camp meeting junkie. My name is Aaron. I am your friend. I have a problem. I grew up going to 5 to 6 camp meetings a weekend. Summer. A weekend, that was a lie. The summer. I don't even know where that came from. I married Shara. I said, Shara, she said, what do you have planned this summer? It's our first, what? I said, we're going to go to camp meeting. She said, how many? I said, 5. She said, you need more Jesus than I do. And I said, well, that's true. That's true. But I remember a lot of the songs growing up, and there's nothing wrong with the songs. They're good songs. But I felt like every song was about us somehow escaping here so that we could get to heaven. It was like this fetish of dying. This place is horrible. Take me to heaven. Someday we'll get over there. Someday we'll have a mansion. Someday we'll get this stuff. And they were the holiness camps. And all they could talk about was dying and going someplace else. And the problem is Jesus rarely talks about that. We have it in the Lord's Prayer. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom, thy will be on as it is in. It doesn't say, our Father who art in heaven, please let me die so I can get there. It says, God, I want to be so close to you that I am less worried about getting into heaven and more worried about heaven getting into me in such a way that I can live a life of calling. And we reverse this. And we put so much weight on our capacity and our calling, and it was never meant to hold the weight that we give it. It doesn't have the foundation to hold your purpose or your value. My dad started coughing up blood when he was a pastor. Eventually went to the doctor and they told him he'd never preach. He'd never speak above a whisper again. And he set me down when I finally decided that I was going to accept this call to preach. And he said, Aaron, if your value and your purpose is tied to that, when it goes away, so will your life. I used to tell my college kids that. They'd come in playing basketball. I'd say, what happens when you blow out your knee? When you're 18 to 22, you're indestructible. I'm never going to blow out my knee. I'm like, well, I'm 38 and I've done it twice now. One time playing against you idiots. What happens if we lose our skill set? What happens if we can't do the things that we love? What happens if all of our holiness in our minds is for this skill set, is for this calling, is for setting the world on fire, right? When we think of dreams, we think of these sort of big plans in our life. I came from an institution, had the Society of World Changers, right? It's all about changing the world. It's all about the calling that God has placed for you to go out and set the world on fire. And the longer I've been in it, the less concerned I am with setting the world on fire. And the more concerned I am is, has the Holy Spirit set you on fire? Have you been close enough to Him to feel that refiner's fire that changes our character in such a way that we can live the calling that God has placed on us, and then, and only then, will we understand His perfect and pleasing will for our lives. But if we start here, we'll never get it. And some of us have felt that weight. We have put our values, our significance, our purpose, and things that were never meant to hold it. And if it hasn't crushed us yet, it's close. And we put our hopes and our dreams in people and institutions that hurt us. And it's because we view purpose through a faulty lens. And if you view too far out, or if you don't view through the proper way, it will get fuzzy. And I think even in a camp like this, on a night like this, there are those of us who our lives feel fuzzy. They feel out of control. They feel crushing. We can't handle the pressure anymore. We've tried to perform and it wasn't good enough. We tried to act and we aren't holy enough. We've done all of the things for all of the people and all of the stuff, trying to earn the love of God, trying to earn the appreciation of people. And it's this crushing weight that will destroy us. And God wants to short circuit the whole thing and said, I never called you to any of that anyway. All I'm asking you to do is come be close to me. And then wake up tomorrow and come be close to me. And then wake up the next day and come be close to me. And at some point, that proximity, that closeness shapes us in such a way that we wake up one morning and there's a character that has been built within us that we can't even comprehend. We did not do it. God did. And we start to realize that if we have the closeness and the ensuing character, it can inform our calling wherever it may be. And I think God is calling some of us to a renewed sense of closeness to Him tonight. He is wooing us, begging us, drawing us into right relationship with Him. I'm going to ask you guys to stand, and the team's going to come forward here in a moment. And as you stand, if just for a moment you would just bow your heads and close your eyes. As we're standing here, no one looking around. This isn't a posturing moment. This isn't a performance moment. This isn't a value moment. This is a Jesus moment. Jesus is calling you to him. Some of us have been stuck in the reverse order for so long, we don't even know the way out. But what does it even look like? What it looks like is desiring God more than the success, desiring God more than the praise, desiring God more than our own pride. Just for a moment tonight, could we set aside our pretenses? Just for a moment tonight, could we lay aside our pride? And could we start some real self-reflection that, Jesus, am I doing what you are calling me to do? Which is to be so close to you that I start to look like you. What if our lives started to look like Jesus, started to live like Jesus, started to love like Jesus, and when people encountered us, they would say things like, I'm not sure who that person is, but they sure look a lot like Jesus. And God is calling us, drawing us to that. Here in a moment, I'm going to pray, but before I do, here's what I'm going to ask. With every head bowed, every eyes closed. If that's you here today, if something in that lens resonated with you, you're living a fuzzy life, you're living a life that's out of control, the pressure is there. You may be on your last try, and Jesus is all you've got left. If I can be frank, that's a beautiful place to be. If that's you today, just briefly, would you just look up at your head and just let me see your eyes for just a moment? Just a moment. I'm going to pray over those of you who have looked up, and here's what I'm going to ask. I don't know why it is, but Dr. Bounds taught me a new word this week. And for some reason, when Jesus chooses to encounter people in the New Testament, he always asks for some sort of physical response. Sometimes it's put mud in your eyes. Sometimes it's jump in the well. Sometimes it's go tell the people, right? But there's some sort of physical response that he asks. There's nothing magical. He could do it however he wants. So it makes me sense that it's less for him and more for us. You've made that first move by looking up. As I pray today, and as we prepare to sing, I'm just going to ask you to come seek Jesus. Come ask him for that closeness, that proximity that drives a change in our character so we can fulfill the calling and find his perfect and pleasing will. Lord, you saw how many looked up. You know, there are those of us who feel like we've been performing. There's those of us who are hurting. There's those of us who just feel out of control. We feel the pressure. Life feels fuzzy, God. And they need you now more than ever. And I just pray right now, Lord, you would give them the courage, the clarity, and the wisdom to step out and to come draw close to you, to view their lives through your lens of purpose. You're calling us to closeness. You're calling us to character. Let us embrace you and embrace it. In Christ's precious and holy name we pray. Would you come seek him as we sing?
Number 121. Softly and tenderly, Jesus is calling for you and for me. See on the porch